Smoke from another country is now the single biggest air quality event in the United States this year. Right now, as of Tuesday, the 21st of July, 2026, more than 120 million Americans across the Midwest and the Northeast have been living under air quality alerts driven almost entirely by fires burning on the other side of the Canadian border. And the fires producing it are, by Canada's own official designation, not under control. Let me give you the scale because the numbers matter here. Across Canada, more than 800 active wildfires are burning. According to NASA Earth Observatory data as of July 14th, they have consumed 1.9 million hectares of forest. That is roughly 4.7 million acres in a single season, and that season is not close to over. The worst of it is in Ontario, directly north of Minnesota, Michigan, and the Great Lakes. Ontario has recorded 503 wildland fires so far this year. The same period in 2025 saw 357. The 10-year average is 326. Ontario is running more than 50% above its own historical average, and it is only the third week of July. Of the fires currently burning in Ontario, more than 190 are active. Around 80 of them carry the official status, not under control. That is not editorial language. That is the Ministry of Natural Resources classification, and it means crews have not established a perimeter around the fire. One fire defines this season. It is designated Thunder Bay 36. It started on July 12th in a remote corner of Wabakimi Provincial Park at roughly 100 hectares. Over the following 4 days, it merged with 3 other fires. By July 16th, Ontario Forest Fires confirmed the combined fire measured 350,922 hectares. That is nearly twice the total land area of the city of Toronto. There is no containment timeline in place for it. Now here is where this stops being a Canadian story. The smoke does not stop at the border, and neither, it turns out, do the fires. A wildfire that started in Minnesota known as the Thumb Fire crossed north into Ontario, merged with an Ontario fire designated Fort Frances 39, and is now part of the fire complex threatening Lac LaCroix First Nation. So we are looking at a genuine cross-border fire event moving in both directions across a border that means nothing to a fire front. Let's talk about the American response because it has been substantial and it has gone largely unreported. The United States has deployed more than 2,000 wildland firefighters and support personnel to Canada this season. As of July, 567 American fire personnel were assigned to active fires across multiple Canadian provinces. In mid-July, 5 additional 20-person federal crews were sent to Alberta. These are not volunteers. They come from the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and from state wildland fire agencies. Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection sent a crew north. That is a state on the Atlantic coast sending firefighters 1,500 miles to fight a fire in another country. This happens under an arrangement most Americans have never heard of. Since 1982, the United States and Canada have operated a reciprocal wildland fire agreement, coordinated on the American side by the National Interagency Coordination Center in Boise, and on the Canadian side by the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center in Winnipeg. When one country's resources are exhausted, the other sends crews, aircraft, and equipment across the border. It has worked in both directions for over 40 years. Canada has repeatedly sent water bombers and crews to California and the Pacific Northwest. This year, the flow is overwhelmingly northbound, but there is a hard limit to it, and this is the part worth sitting with. The United States is in its own difficult fire season in the West. Every crew sent to Ontario or Alberta is a crew not staged in California, Oregon, or Idaho. That is a real resource decision being made in real time, and it is the direct cost to the United States of a fire season happening in another country. Now, the human impact, because this is where it becomes concrete. Wildfire smoke is not simply an inconvenience or a haze. The particulate matter in it, PM 2.5, is small enough to pass through lung tissue and enter the bloodstream. Researchers quoted by NPR this month described sustained exposure at the levels seen in the Midwest as comparable to smoking roughly half a pack of cigarettes a day. We have hard American data on what that does. The CDC, publishing in its Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, found that during the 19 days of Canadian wildfire smoke over the United States in 2023, asthma-associated emergency department visits ran 17% higher than expected. A 2024 review in the New England Journal of Medicine found that daily asthma emergency visits rise between 3 and 10% for every 10 microgram per cubic meter increase in PM 2.5. The long-term picture is worse. A study published in Science Advances this year estimated that long-term exposure to wildfire smoke particulates contributed to approximately 24,100 deaths per year across the lower 48 states between 2006 and 2020. That is not a projection. That is a retrospective estimate of deaths that have already occurred, and the burden is not distributed evenly. Research on emergency department visits found that among older adults hospitalized for asthma or COPD during smoke events, the share who were non-white rose from 27% in 2022 to nearly 36% in 2023. The share who were Black or African American rose from 11% to nearly 17%. Communities with more outdoor workers, older housing stock, less air conditioning, and less filtration absorbed more of this. The event was significant enough that air quality became a live concern in the run-up to the FIFA World Cup final at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey on July 19th, with forecasters tracking smoke plumes against the match schedule. When a wildfire in Northern Ontario is a factor in planning for the largest sporting event on the American calendar, the distance has stopped mattering. Now, trade and transportation, which is the impact almost nobody is covering. On the evening of July 13th, a CN rail freight train stopped on a siding near Armstrong, Ontario, waiting for an oncoming train. Standard procedure. While it sat stationary, the fire closed in on both sides of the track. Video from inside the locomotive cab shows flames engulfing the tree line on both sides. A crew member is heard saying, quote, "We're encased in flames now." The crew was evacuated. At least one member was treated for smoke inhalation. 3 other trains carrying combustible and flammable materials were left stranded near Collins First Nation, about 20 miles west of Armstrong. The Teamsters Canada Rail Conference publicly condemned the decision to run trains through an active fire zone. Their statement was one line, quote, "No shipment is worth a human life." The Canadian federal government has opened an investigation into CN's actions. Here is why that matters to an American shipper. CN has suspended freight operations across a stretch of Northwestern Ontario main line, and as of this recording, there is no timeline for reopening it. That stretch is not optional track. It is a primary east-west corridor. With it closed, CN is rerouting as much traffic as it can onto its network south of the Great Lakes, which runs through the American Upper Midwest, from Duluth, Minnesota, across to Sarnia and Windsor in Ontario. Read that again. Canadian freight that cannot cross Canada is being routed through the United States instead. That is additional volume onto American track, American yards, and American crews that were not scheduled to carry it. What does not fit on rail goes to trucks, and truckload capacity in the affected lanes tightens immediately as displaced freight competes for the same equipment. That is a rate pressure that shows up in the cost of moving goods across the northern tier of the United States within weeks. On the highway side, Ontario Highway 527 is closed in both directions between Gull Bay and Armstrong. Highway 599 is closed between Highway 516 and Pickle Lake. Northwestern Ontario has very few alternate routes. Closing one highway there can mean a detour of hundreds of kilometers or cutting a community off entirely. One note for balance. Canadian Pacific Kansas City has stated its operations are not directly affected, and its trains in the region are running normally. So this is a CN corridor problem, not a total Canadian rail shutdown. Now the question a lot of people are asking, how did Canada lose control of this? Let me be careful here, because there is a lot of speculation circulating, and I want to separate what is documented from what is not. What is documented is this. Canada is now in its 4th consecutive severe fire season. The 2025 season was the second worst on record, behind only 2023, when fires burned roughly 150,000 square kilometers. Between 2023 and 2025, close to 10% of Canada's forest area burned. Northwestern Ontario recorded a temperature of 40.7 degrees Celsius, 105 Fahrenheit on July 14th, the hottest reading in Ontario since the 1936 heatwave. Hot, dry, and windy conditions were forecast to persist. Under those conditions, fires that would ordinarily be containable are not. What is also documented, and this is where forestry researchers have been increasingly vocal, is a question about how Canada has been replanting its forests. Speaking to CBC News, forestry experts have argued that decades of commercial replanting have favored softwood monoculture, large uniform stands of black spruce and pine planted for timber value. Conifers carry resins that ignite more readily and burn hotter than broadleaf species. A uniform conifer stand gives a fire continuous, evenly aged fuel with nothing to slow it down. Their argument is that mixing in broadleaf species like birch would create natural fuel breaks and hold moisture in the landscape. I want to be precise about what that claim is and is not. It is not a claim that planting trees caused these fires. Canada is currently losing forests to fire far faster than it is replanting it, and the federal 2 billion trees program has since been cancelled. The claim is narrower and more specific. It is that the species chosen and the uniformity of the stands made the resulting forest more flammable than a mixed forest would have been. That is a real documented critique of forestry practice from within the field. It sits alongside decades of aggressive fire suppression that allowed fuel to accumulate and alongside the heat and drought driving this season. So the honest answer is that this is a management failure layered on top of a climate signal, and pulling the two apart is exactly what the argument in Canada is about right now. To wrap up, here is where things stand as of Tuesday, the 21st of July, 2026. More than 800 active wildfires burning across Canada, 1.9 million hectares consumed. In Ontario alone, more than 190 active fires, around 80 of them officially not under control, and Thunder Bay 36 at over 350,000 hectares with no containment timeline. On the American side, Air quality alerts across as many as 18 states. More than 120 million people affected. AQI above 200 in New York City. Hazardous readings in Chicago and Detroit. More than 2,000 American firefighters deployed north. A primary Canadian rail corridor closed with freight rerouting through the American upper Midwest. And an established body of research linking this kind of smoke exposure to tens of thousands of American deaths a year. If you are in an affected area, the practical guidance has not changed. Check airnow.gov for your local reading, run filtration indoors, and if you have asthma or COVID or heart disease, treat a high AQI day as a day to stay inside. That is the official guidance, and it is the guidance to trust. This is a developing situation, and I will be following it. If you found this useful, like and subscribe, turn notifications on. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.